All of the many creation stories of this planet were actually preceded by a single one which, for reasons open to speculation, has been totally forgotten, or at least ignored. And it said that man's origins were from an incident wherein life got itself slightly tipsy once and then tried to get itself to go upstairs for a little fun. Started to say, thank God the news item was non-illustrated. In another galaxy was once a world on which the worst insult possible was to yell at someone, "Look out, here come the words." And still another way to tell is that dumb people always take it personally. And if that doesn't work, they'll take it seriously, which just proves how dumb they are, since they're both the same dumb thing. One king so advised his eldest heir, never ask his high lord executioner, "How's it hanging?" One man made an extensive survey of all of the available mystical writings and then compiled a list of the major topics they all covered, and discovered it to be quite limited and repetitious from era to era and place to place. The subjects themselves seemed to be just what you would expect, but then he began to wonder if this was due to some intrinsic quality of the subjects, or was based on the fact that he was already primed to expect that it would be these very topics that would be covered. He lastly made use of the list thusly. He decided that he'd use other areas to think about in his mystical reflections. Any other areas but the ones on the list. The task proved much more difficult than he had ever expected, which itself gave him something new to think about. Life-generated thought, if nothing else, is supremely self-protective. Standing in solitude atop a high mountain peak, a man offered up his lament to the sky. It's hard to be excited when there's nothing to be excited about. And life, in the momentary guise of an impending earthquake, replied, "You humans can't ever be satisfied." There was once a mystical order whose initiatory requirement was that you had to carry a hot coal for 5 minutes without using your hands. The secret payoff obviously being that if you could do it, you didn't need no damn mystical order. It is those who don't understand who see a distinction between nouns and verbs, objects and actions. There was once a kingdom in which an immense battle took place between two mighty armies, neither of which wore uniforms by which they could be identified, which in fact is what made them so mighty. Understand this, and you've got another secret payoff. One father's recent comment to a son, perhaps the greatest snare to keeping one's thoughts frantic and out of control, and one's consciousness far from stability and individual use, is in getting angry at the perceived ignorance of others, particularly in their dealings with you. Nothing new here, but always worth a renewed notice. And a viewer writes, "I like it so much better when you cloak your remarks in scenes wherein one person says something to another person, rather than you making your comments directly to the audience." Me too, sir. Me too. One man asked himself, which is more fun? Getting high on the weekend when it seems more acceptable, or doing so during the week when it seems less so? He pondered. And then some more, and suddenly thought, wow, why not use the same question on myself regarding being dazed and distracted? Many years ago was a mystical order of knights who believed that the afterlife of a heroic warrior differed from the paradise dreamed of by the ordinary in the fact that one of the two groups pictured it as being an eternity of nothing but weekends and the other as weekdays forever. Want to guess which group believed which version? Then want to guess why you guessed it was that way? There was once a planet populated by thinking ships rather than creatures resembling man. And they were individually led by a verbose captain who stayed up in the crow's nest and from there attempted to oversee all of the ship's operations. From an outside observer's view, this seemed to go pretty well. But the real work of making the thing go still went on below, same as here. The conflicts of gaming. In a contest between muscles and neurons, the predicted outcome is of no consequence. So much so that bets are not even taken. When it came to his emotions, one guy said that he could change gears faster than he could lie and say it was him changing the gears. One day, whilst pondering on such matters, the term essence of consciousness came in a man's mind, and with it he was much and quickly taken. But then had to ask himself, just what would be the essence of consciousness? And after a moment replied to himself that it would be consciousness without the need to comment on itself. Those with no understanding of man, such as priests, psychologists, and everyone else, in their attempts to change man are like someone first trying to assist the head of a snake by cutting off its tail, then failing that, cutting off its head to aid its tail. Like someone first trying to assist the head of a snake by cutting off its tail, then failing that, cutting off its tail to aid its head. Lacking full appreciation of the dimensions of a system, one never locates a profitable area in which to work on the system. Or put another way, believing that the alphabet has a beginning and an end prohibits a comprehension of the nature of words. Those who would change man without understanding man are those who, in their attempt to assist fish, first remove them from the water. There was once a mystical order whose battle cry was, "Down with butchers," although they never went into battle and had no interest in matters of meat. Go figure. There was once a leaf who fell reflective and undertook a study of the tree on which it grew. It was first struck by the work being done by the branch to which it was attached, then expanded the scope of its inquiry to appreciate the intricate operations of the major limbs from which the branches extended. It then moved its attention to the dominant position of the great trunk itself and was thereby mightily impressed. But then it ultimately realized that the entire structure was totally dependent on the ground from which it arose. The ground, the ground, the ground. Regarding the difference between intelligence and consciousness. If we use the metaphorical train trip of the mythical Orient Express running from the mundane city of Paris to the mystical destination of Istanbul, then no matter how smart you are, it won't stop the train. And if you grasp the symbolism being herein used, you can then see the distinction between intelligence and consciousness. One man who meditated alone in the woods for many years achieved the ability out there to pretty much still his thoughts. And didn't do too badly either when he'd go into town. Except when he'd try to cash a check or get his car tagged or use the post office or get a haircut and stuff like that. Amidst his remark, the speaker had this to say. Okay, here's my joke for the evening. Well, it's not really a joke, but there's nothing else to call it. Anyway, here it is. Trying to tell ordinary people the truth about life is like attempting to describe to a solar hydrogen atom the nature of the sun. And his caution was well founded in that no one found this funny. Well, no one laughed. A viewer wrote, "Do I understand you correctly that you're saying there are two types of thought, life-generated thought and then some other kind?" And I wrote him back, "Yes, that is correct." And he wrote me back, "Good, now we're getting somewhere. Now let me ask you this. Which type of thought made me write and ask you about the two types?" There was once a mystical order whose rallying cry was, "Abandon ship!" One version of a well-known Genesis of man myth says that when God decided it was time for Adam to leave the quiet, peaceful garden of childhood and go explore his new land of the neural, that the big guy didn't trick him into eating a forbidden fruit and like that, but rather just told him to go out and play in traffic, knowing that the traffic would quickly begin to play in him. And thus, till today, do things still stand. Okay. There was once a mystical order whose primary focus was on thought, whose rallying cry was, "Abandon ship!" To believe that to know yourself will lead to something much greater is to have a much overblown impression of yourself. The dictum above mentioned, to be of any use, must be more specific than it sounds, which is why, for so many years, so many men have been so frustrated in the attempt. A boy said to his father, "Tell me again how easy it is." And the elder replied, "I never said easy, I said simple, as in basic, elemental, unadorned, artless, unaffected, straightforward, free of duplicity, without pretension, and like that." No matter what else, from the view of the few, one thing that can always be said in favor of the mystic struggle is that it narrows it all down to just one single problem. Glancing down at his hands and feet and everything that lay about him, a man decided that one way to deal with the mind would be to think only about what was presently happening, which he did. But then he lost it. You always know where the body is, but anything beyond that is a struggle. As regards the subject of mysticism, only, quote, mystics, that is, self-styled mystics, that is, mystics who don't know what it's all about. Only these kinds of non-mystics believe that there is such a thing as mysticism, as opposed to the private, personal thing that always must be done and for which there is no suitable name. Two guys are playing a game, and the first one says, if thinking about stuff is stupid, then thinking about what stuff is the most stupidest. And the second guy scratched his cheek, cut his eyes, chewed his lip, then replied, thinking about thinking, I guess. And the first guy jumped up and shouted, close! But no. The most stupid would be thinking about trying to be more conscious. You know, the effort to awaken, get enlightened, and like that. And the second guy went through his pausing, scratching, and chewing routine again, then said, but ain't that all the same thing? And the first guy began scratching his face, cutting his eyes, and chewing his lip. Moral: if two guys are going to play a game, let them both be you. There was once a planet on which, when you died, instead of your possessions, you were buried with a moral. In response to some slight he had suffered at their hands, one man told his feet, dig 'em and weep. Another legend you'll seldom hear, seldom hell, never, except here. Anyway, another legend says that all religions and mystical organizations were founded by mystics who got tired of trying. When questioned about it, one man had this to say: one thing for certain that keeps men far removed from any possibility of understanding the nature of life is them taking theirs to be of much greater importance than it should be evident that it is. Several in the crowd wanted him to repeat this, but were beaten down by the rest of them. A fairly safe prediction. When those who undertake the quest reach the place wherein they realize the full seriousness of their thoughts, and likewise their real silliness, they tend to soon lose all interest in all other matters deemed serious, knowing them to be mere reflections of someone's silly-willy thinking. Of course, someone has, me probably, already pointed out that any prognostication one can make regarding thought is a safe bet. Why you figure that is? Those who don't know assume the idea of fasting to apply to the body. Not so for those who know. According to a rejected patent application, one man attempted to tie a string to his thoughts and put a trapdoor on his emotions. We can only assume that he didn't try anything similar with his body, or else he had never been able to make it to a post office to send in his application. A certain traveler once pondered, is it easier to stand motionless in one place or walk away without touching the ground? No matter the momentary approach you employ, it always comes down to the matter of control. A correspondent offers this observation: if a man sufficiently experienced in the experience does ever think about himself, it must surely be within the framework of times when he discovers himself not actively involved in the struggle and says to himself, "What a fool I am," or something to that effect. End quote. And that viewer mentioned earlier writes again saying, "See, I told you it was better when you let someone else say things like that instead of you doing it." According to one man, quoting, "Here's how it is. You can achieve enlightenment alone on a mountain, or you can achieve enlightenment amidst everyday life. But the main thing is that you can't hardly achieve it anywhere. So don't fool yourself and get all misled." I told him that you'd be sending him a personal thank you note later. After doing a genie's kid brother a favor, the Spirit in return offered the man his choice of rewards. He could either have enjoyment of self-righteous indignation intensified, or that of self-pity. "Man," he grimaced, "what a choice!" Today's free electron moral. Anyone who tells you that it's easy either is not your friend, doesn't know what they're talking about, or is not from this universe. Plus, what you doing worrying about easy anyway? Now regarding some other matters not previously covered this evening. After he died, one man said to life, "So now I guess I'm supposed to be impressed." One man used to converse with his own thoughts until it came to his attention how dumb they were. A man asked a mystic, "Is literally not giving a damn anything at all like being more conscious?" And the mystic replied, "It's according to who's doing it." And the man said, "Really?" The mystic replied, "No, not really, but I could tell you needed some kind of answer." Regarding the trade balance, if you take any part of man's life seriously, then you'll have to take all of it seriously. Yuck, forsooth, and what a waste of brain cells. Whenever anyone would come to this mystic's house and knock on his door to see him, he'd always holler back in response, "Put out the fires!" All that you can do to accomplish the goal hinges on one thing. You can imagine it as many. It can seem to be many. But it still hinges on just one thing. A man once asked a mystic, "Well, if you won't tell me what the secret is, couldn't you give me just the teensiest little hint as to where to look for it?" And the mystic replied, "Sure, and I'll do better than that. Do better than teensy. Here, don't ever bother looking any place that's outside your own skin." The man silently seemed to ponder this for a moment, then shook the mystic's hand, thanked him, then turned and walked away, trying not to think about it, which wasn't hard to do. And by the way, for those of you who do have a serious interest in the whole area of mysticism, etc., perhaps you'd be interested in some cosmic news in this regard. It has long been privately alleged in certain quarters that it is only on less developed planets that mysticism exists. Of course, to anyone who understands anything, this makes perfect sense. And lastly, there was once a curious train that, if it be stopped, it perished. Its saving protection being that hardly anyone even knew that it could be stopped. Let us take an allegorical excursion using, to begin with, a fairly reasonable example. Take the hierarchy of the food chain the hierarchy of dominance of the oceans, from the lowliest, the krill, slugs, anything that's smaller than that, the lowliest form of life in the ocean. Let's assume that's a little krill. And it goes on up to larger little fishes. Groupers. Anyway, it goes on up. We know how it goes. It gets a little bit bigger and a little bit bigger. And then we get up to a shark. And without trying to go into any details, which none of us are that interested in, this is a fair description that there is everywhere. In any given locale, we could pick out something on terra firma, a specific locale on this planet, and there would be an identifiable, normally called food chain, but a hierarchy. It amounts to a food chain when you get down to it. But the oceans give a small, excellent opportunity to use an example, because you can picture it as one locale, even though oceans run together, some large areas are separate, but you can pick this one area, and that all aquatic creatures live therein. But there literally is, going from small and it keeps going up. And when you get into at least the carnivores, you get to a shark, as would be true, again, in any area. You can pick out an isolated area, some savanna, some plain, some valley, even on land, and if it was enclosed, there would be. In other words, if it was almost a closed ecological system, creature-wise, there would be the same kind of stable hierarchy. But at any rate, in the oceans, you get to the shark and that's it. There is no instability, there is no question. Groupers do not get together, they do not work out, they do not take up weightlifting, they do not take assertiveness training. There's no way. The chain is not in question. There are no weak spots, there are no ambiguities. It goes directly from the smallest to the shark. You get to the shark, and that's the end of it. No one takes on the shark. No one eats the shark. The shark has nothing to fear. He is the top of it. That's it, in all the oceans. Okay. On this planet, then, it changes. On this planet, there is an anomalous. I shouldn't tell you that, because then you would assume that there would be life somewhere else. There is a different, well, I don't have to take back anomalous. It's hard enough to get it out sometimes. So we'll let it go. I'm comparing it to something. God knows what. I'm comparing it to theoretical life somewhere else. At any rate, just get it clear. This is just the hardwired extant example. But it gets up to the shark, and that is it. Now, we're going to take it metaphorically in a minute, as you know. But it gets up, it gets no higher than that. No matter where you look in the ocean, no matter what other dreams other fish may have, other aquatic creatures, it gets to the shark, and that is it. Anything he wants to eat, he eats. I'm actually leaving out certain mammals. But anyway, the shark, he's it. Except then, if you change, that's why I threw in the word anomalous, if we change, if we drag in a new element, this is no longer true. The element we now bring in is man. This was a theatrical policy. And I'll tell you why. I was going ahead and do the thinking for you that someone listening to this, I'm sort of a smart ass, could be listening to this and go, well, that's not much to say, because man can take on almost any creature. This through man's unique gifts, to wit, that he can overcome even land creatures. Man is the only thing, the only creature that can eat a shark, that can defeat a shark. But it requires that he take the shark out of its natural habitat. Now we're leaving out right now weapons. A man cannot jump in the water and take on a shark. A shark is stronger than a man in the water. There are sharks that weigh more than man. Let's just assume that by and large a shark is a stronger creature in his habitat than the average person, man or woman, that would jump in. But a man is the only creature that can defeat a shark, that can kill a shark and take him on. But it requires one thing for him to be assured of victory. He has got to get the shark out of its environment. This becomes the crucial level. If a man goes below that level, in with a shark, no matter how, let's assume, again, if you make sure you get the point, no matter how strong the man is, we could have a super heavyweight wrestler, football player, anybody. If the man gets below that line and jumps in with a shark, don't put your money on the man. That is the statement I started, that a man can kill a shark. That a man would be a shark's master, the only creature that could master a shark. But it has to be with this one little quirk, which normally does not happen with other creatures. It's part of why I was using the water, even saying that on land I could point out examples if we were dealing with a closed ecosystem somewhere, relatively closed, in just an isolated area. In that area there will always be a food chain. And it will reach a high point, and there will be some dominant creature there. On the land, many areas will be a lion. And that is the dominant creature. Everybody else has to fear the lion. Within any closed system, there is a dominant creature in the physical food chain. A dominant creature that no one else eats, and it eats whoever it pleases. This is true in the water with sharks. Except for that one small detail, that its environment can be breached, not by it. It cannot voluntarily leave because it is not an amphibious creature. But there's a creature above, that is outside of its native environment, man, that can breach the environment, that can intrude in his environment and defeat him if he gets him out of his environment. Which of course is what fishing is. Sport fishing, or spear fishing, or if a man just stole a boat and pulled out a rifle and started taking shots at a shark. He has got to get the shark. Well, let's stop the weapons. Forget that for a minute. The man would have to at least have a line of some kind and get the shark out of the water. If he gets him out of his environment, it's obvious. He's defeated him. If he can just pull him out of the environment and stay away from him, the shark will die within a matter of minutes. So man is the only creature, it's the only creature on this planet that can get inside of a natural ecosystem, a natural food chain, a natural sequential order of dominance, and take on the dominant creature. Man is the only one who can do it. And it's not just his intelligence. I could put it that way. That's why I was going to say that when I did the pregnant pause, I figured somebody somewhere would go, well, that's all you're getting at. No, it's trickier than that. In this instance, a bit trickier, because the only way that will work, notwithstanding they had some extremely powerful weapon that he could actually stay on a boat and fire down into the water and kill the shark. But if he is going to defeat the shark without recourse to great technology, of just a line and a hook of some kind, the only way he does it, even though he had the intelligence to come up with the idea, he has got to get the shark out of its environment. He has got to get it above that water line to defeat it. He cannot defeat it in its environment. Now could I point out to you that consider the nervous system of man, or consider man here. And the level there is a mental level. And man has all of this area below the water line where he's got everything that he normally thinks of as his emotions, his unconsciousness, his subconsciousness, or whatever else he wants to call it. He has the world of the nonverbal, to make it easy, just call it his physical survival instincts. And then he has that above the water level that makes him unique. That in one sense, if you're following this, the neural the mind of man, his own thoughts, his own mental processes, just in relationship to him, has the same relationship that this is like man up here, and everything below the waterline would be comparable to a shark. Down here, this thing is supreme. And of course, all this is relative to the people who live, whose center of themselves, or whose sense of reality, whose essence, whose personality, it varies, is closer to this. That's why I normally refer to as the more simple of the world, or physical people. And it's not, of course, just cut there, at least not over the lifetime of a man. You could not make such a schematic. But with each person there is, and with all of humanity, there's the same kind of relationship of his own thoughts to the rest of him, to his non-thinking self, would be the same relation, bear the same relationship as man himself would to my shark in the water scenario. Now again, in one sense, there's nothing really verbally new about that, just the metaphors I picked out, because for years, throughout the history of man, you've had religion and everybody else in their own crude, non-understood manner trying to describe. Well, religion, it just only comes out that man is a battlefield between the forces of good and the forces of evil. That has been probably the most commonly used and accepted description of man in religious, and even taking religion as a metaphor at times, a few people. But that is the common description, but they're still describing the same thing. For someone less religiously inclined, they might describe it as that man himself is the battlefield and the forces between civilization and evolution and devolution. That man is a battlefield and it's a constant struggle between his more humane, his more civil tendencies, and those leftovers from his older past that still drag him into uncivil, antisocial behavior. Yeah. So, if you can see man's mind dealing with the rest of him, or bearing the same relationship to him below the level of consciousness, not in the Freudian or psychological sense, but in the sense that there could be, for the sake of discussing it, a line drawn and say that everything above this is the operations, physiologically speaking, the operations of the frontal lobe, the cortical intellect of man, somewhere above the midbrain, as they would say, and from there on down, the relationship between the two would be the same as I was describing earlier between a shark and a man. But neither one of them in the shark's environment, the man above the waterline. And me saying as long as the man's above the waterline, he has the ability to overcome a shark, to defeat a shark, which absolutely is not true. I assume that all of you agree to that making this literally fit on all four squares, all corners, to dot every I and make it come out perfectly is never possible. But I assume you do understand that no man under ordinary conditions can jump in the water and take on any sizable shark. He cannot. It's not even open to question. The outcome is ordained. But through the one simple act of getting the shark out of his environment, and understand it only takes some. You don't even have to get the shark up on dry land. If in some way a man was out swimming or up on a raft of some kind or a boat, again leaving out advanced technology such as rifles and such as that. But if a man had some string, a rope, something to entice to get hold of the shark, to get it to hold on to it, he didn't have to get it completely out of the water. If he can just get enough of it out of the water, the shark's a dead man. Nothing it can do. None of its strength, none of its native instinctive abilities will save it, because it has been taken to a detrimental degree out of its environment. In other words, you just get his head out and hold him up long enough, the shark's a goner. Does anybody see any relationship? How much time would we save if I dropped all rhetorical questions? I don't know. How much extra time do we need? Jesus, most of us got more years left than we care for anyway, so. I don't know why I ask rhetorical questions, because you know damn well I'm about to answer it. Or at least comment on it. I don't answer them, that's why I ask them. But Any civilized person, which is nowadays any ordinary person on this planet, their mind operates to, if they're civilized. Again, I'm pointing out, by ordinary people's own definitions, we're leaving out, just in general, the so-called professional criminal element, people who are so-called mentally deranged, and etc. Just your ordinary, everyday, middle class, middle of the parade of life people. All of those people have at the disposal of their intellect the ability not to kill a shark, but they have the ability to keep control of life, their life, above the waterline. That their mind is operative and dominant just enough to keep them civil. If indeed the mind falls below the water, that is when, not that one thing causes another, we're not dealing with three-dimensional sequential order, but that's the way words go. But when a man's mind is too much, if not all the time, but is too often and below the waterline, and the shark in him is chewing on him rather than him pulling the shark out of the water, that is what is generally constituted to be unacceptable criminal behavior. Antisocial people. Or if not that, then they're adjudicated to be crazy, nuts, insane, mentally unstable, mentally dangerous. They are simply not the people you want to live next door to you. You do not want them driving the cab in which you're riding. You do not want to buy fresh baked goods from them. And you do not want them working on your car underneath. And you do not want to accept packages wrapped in brown paper from them. Okay. Can anybody take this a little bit further? Because to show you the sequence again, which I know some of you do to yourself now, or should be able to. Not only was the original picture of life in the water, the hierarchy, the pecking order of dominance and the food chain physically in the oceans, it went from that to that same situation being comparable in man, using the waterline as the level of consciousness. But now, and that would suit many purposes, which I just exemplified, of describing behavior that is acceptable to the majority and that which is not. People who appear to be reasonably sane and social and civil, and those who are not. But now we can take it a step further. The whole idea behind mysticism in all of its forms, the whole idea behind this thing, this kind of stuff, is, let's take it into a third level of symbolism, because it's no longer really metaphor, it's symbolism. But the attempt to do this is not the second stage. The first stage that I was using was life in here, and about how man can have a so-called unnatural effect. Unnatural simply from the view of the sea life, but that he can interfere in a singular manner, in a manner that is not open to any other creature, that he can dominate, he can overcome the dominant creature in this physical environment. But with one proviso, he's already outside this natural environment, and he has got to drag the dominant creature, the one creature that no one else can defeat in this environment. He has got to get this creature, at least partially, out of its environment, which he can do. We all know that. He can get him out of there, and if he does, the shark's dead. That's the first stage of my metaphorical description. The second was drawing man here instead of the water line. Is this representing the mind of man, to do it in a dualistic, simplistic manner, that this is the mind of man, and everything below the water line is the older survival. It's the body of man, with all its hungers, needs, joys, sorrows, blah, blah, blah. It is the underwater life of man. And this, instead of just being man now, vis-a-vis the shark, it is now man's thoughts vis-a-vis his non-thinking part. The third stage is now look at this not an ordinary man, and thus no longer interested in descriptions of how this relates to civil versus uncivil behavior. Now look at it as the few people who ever attempt this sort of thing and begin to get anywhere with it. It's what that sort of man is doing is now back to a new version of the first one. Is he indeed, what you're attempting to do is not just stay stable, not just stay civilized. Of course, it'd be hard to believe anybody be around that same length of time and think it is in some way to actually make you a better person, a better citizen, a more civil and decent person. Although in many cases you may appear to be better than, it's no consequence. You may appear to be calmer, less aggressive than you were when you got involved with it, but hey, big deal. That's what we say. I understand that's what they say in private in the mystical business. Big deal. I think I understand that they say that. But at any rate, they do now. At the third level, I was pulling this symbolism. Can you see that what you're attempting to do is to pull the shark out of the water, not just deal with it, not keep it under control, and now we're not talking about the life of the body. This is where it really gets tricky. Let me make sure, back to the second stage of talking about ordinary people and applying this picture to them, it is just a kind of balancing act. That civil, ordinary people, just ordinary, sane, everyday people, the man keeps this in check sufficiently that he stays, that he meets the qualifications of being normal, sane, the people who run the world, the people on whom life on this planet depends, your everyday people. Not Sly Stone anymore, but, well, he had problems. But everyday people, that's them. It's what they're dealing. They're not trying to pull the shark out of the water. Although I will grant you this, those of you who are listening, or hearing it. If an ordinary person understood, was listening to this and followed some of what I was saying, they might say, well, metaphorically, you're incorrect because that is what psychiatry is attempting. Or at a more metaphorical level, even religion is attempting. But they could say specifically that the whole idea of, quote, mental health is to subdue this to the point that you are civilized, which is simply the old 1950s science fiction, black and white science fiction movie idea, now known as AI, the dream of AI, but used to in the 50s before they had that, would be a mad scientist that in some way had saved the brain of someone who died in a car crash, and it's now in this little fishbowl that they had, wires run through it and things flashing, those Van Gilder generators or whoever they are, and it's this brain pulsating with lights going. I know I've mentioned this before, but that is, does everybody understand, that is man in general. If you got outside the religious area, which this would appear to be somewhat of an improvement or a progressed idea, that is man's idea, ordinary man's idea of evolvement. That is the idea of Superman. And that does not leave out the religious. It's just they're a little further back in their picturization of it. It is someone free, quote, of all the, well now quote, I'm just trying to wrap it up, all the vices, weights, sins, flaws of the body. A brain. Just a brain, just sitting there. Can't get horny. It can't borrow money from you. It can't cheat you. It's not greedy. I got too commercial there. The 7 deadly sins are unknown. Well, they're not possible for the brain. See, there's always that little part. If we had a brain could be the world's only true Christian or Jew or the only real Muslim. Because only just that brain, if you had a brain living there in a fishbowl with the wires and the lights and it pulsating, that's the only thing in the life of ordinary man that, and of course now they're dealing with a dream of artificial intelligence. Of course, I like they heard me talking this, the kind of people involved with that, they go, well, yeah, but you're being silly because back then they didn't have the wherewithal we have now, because now is a possibility. Don't point your finger at me, sir, just because you have a college education. It sounds so much better, but see, that's part of the idea of progress I keep pointing out. There is nothing new. They just keep repackaging it. That's why it's supposed to be. That's the cannibalistic nature, the necessary cannibalistic nature of the mental life of man. But people nowadays, I'm not being funny. You see this right quick. I'm going to point it out. People involved now with artificial intelligence, or people who keep up with such matters, if they say, wait a minute, you're saying, are you comparing the work going on right now in the field of AI? Are you comparing that with those kind of, Hollywood dreams from the 50s of, a brain that they say and kept alive, that the brain now can think and it's going to take over the world, which that's always, if you've never seen the movies, that was always what happened. The scientists at first saved the brain maybe, for reasonable purposes, like just he wanted to work on the brain. But the brain, some way he learned to talk to the brain. And he set up some kind of Morse code, and the brain would pulsate and send him messages. And he found out the brain knew more than he did. The brain was smarter. So anyway, in a short period of time, the brain begins to dominate the scientist, begins to tell him what to do. Next thing you know, the brain is started some kind of cult, taking on religious, it's starting to have a new religious group or a new political party. At any rate, well into the movie, you see what's happening. This brain there is about to take over the damn world. Someone involved with AI or just any reasonable, intelligent person nowadays that keeps up at all with such as that would laugh if they, if they ask me, "Are you comparing the two?" And I went, "Oh yeah, same thing." And they go, "You're an idiot. You're an absolute idiot," because they believe that there is some possibility of AI. And of course, not just possibility, but there's also, and they could really make me look silly. They say, as a matter of fact, it's even sillier if they were this sharp. It's a good thing they got me to do them for them. Because if they're real sharp, they'd go, wait a minute. I tell you what's curious is, as wrong as you are, as silly as it is for you to bring out the example of cheap Hollywood science fiction, there is a gram of truth in that, because of the fact that we're so close to AI now, of actually having machines that can think, that it's going to be, it's not a question, people would say this now, they would say it's not a question of, are we going to get machines that can think? That's not the question anymore. That's just a matter of months or a few years. And it's not even a question of, will they ever get as smart as us? Oh yeah. That's not the question, dear friend, they could say to me, being patronizing. Dear friend. The danger is going to be very shortly, probably in our lifetime, the danger is going to be the machines will start getting smarter than man. Now I see it. That brain, we've been through this. No matter how beautiful Rembrandt can paint a woman, she can never give him any. No matter what beautiful feast Rembrandt could include, or Da Vinci could in the Last Supper, what little they had to eat, you will never get any nourishment from it. The idea that a creator is going to create something and it outstrip him, we've been through this. It's just another, anytime that you think that perhaps humanity is more intelligent, just collectively than I seem to give them credit for, there is the prime example, because there is an example that's considered to be cutting edge of intellectual and technological development of man. Right now, I'm sure some of the highest IQ'd people in this country and throughout the world are working on artificial intelligence and worrying. It's considered an integral part along the lines, while we're still working on this, is to try and develop some sort of way to make sure that the machines do not get smarter than we are, and indeed, actually take over, not that old stupid brain in a fishbowl. And you think, wait a minute, some of the finest brains, the highest IQs, as they call it, in this country, in the world right now, are not only convinced that any day now they'll have a machine as smart as man. Of course, they should speak for themselves, but not only smart as man, but they believe. They sincerely believe, and will look you dead in the eye, and a reporter, and the Nobel Committee, and say that there's a chance that something a man can create will get better, greater, especially more intelligent, but that will outstrip the creator. And you think, wait a minute, do you know anything about life in a scum life in a pool? Much less this than a kid knows. And say, do you know anything about the food chain? Just the physical food chain? They go, well, certainly. And yet you think that man's going to invent something. Well, no matter what he calls it, but that any creator is going to create something, and then the creator will become superior to him. That's just many times you do get overheated and think, maybe people are wising up. At the second example, how long we got? The second example, ordinary people, all they're trying to do collectively and individually do not understand it because you never thought about it. You're as smart as anybody. Nobody thinks about it. But what they're trying to do, to use my allegories here, is just strike a balance. That the man up here representing thought, but representing man compared to the shark, is just trying to keep a balance. To attempt to do this, what you're doing is you are indeed trying to pull the shark out of the water. Now, if you're following any of this, I meant to get more time. We're out of, so what else is new? It is not to strike some kind of balance, and it is not the same thing as being civilized. To be civilized, you can't kill the shark. You're not supposed to kill the shark. But if an ordinary person heard that, they would say, well, you're trying to so dominate it. And as I said, as I got off on the brain, they, in fact, if anybody listened to this, they would want to take it further, very likely, and say, all right, the truly civilized man would be a man truly with no unconscious, crude, feral desires left. And that sounds like a brain on a stick, a brain in a jar. Or put another way, a truly religious person at the crudest, the most simplistic level, all it sounds like is like a eunuch who's on his deathbed. That's about as close as somebody can get to being a true Christian or Buddhist. Is they're dying. Is there anything you want? No. That's very close. That's about as close. That is what they would say in my picture, is that, well, yeah, to be truly civilized, man, what we should do is in some way, not kill our body, but in some way kill the shark in us, to use your description. All right. What they're not trying to do. But indeed to try and do this, it takes an unnatural interference. This is natural with ordinary men. But to do what this thing kind of stuff's about is unnatural because you're attempting to pull that, which is the native part. I was going to bring up the story tonight about a tree that got leaf that got reflected about a tree, and started tracing down all the things that was responsible, and realized it's the ground that's responsible. Everything's dependent upon the ground. Men are attempting to fight that, against which they have no grudge. They just don't know it. They're always fighting an illusionary enemy, or they wouldn't try to do anything. Thus, many people, the majority of the world, still believes that man is a battleground between two kinds of opposing forces. I tried to cover it tonight about a kingdom in which there was a colossus battle between two mighty armies, neither of which wore uniformed, by which they could be identified. Pause, which is what made them mighty. Men do not understand the forces. All that people feel is there's some kind of conflict and there's something I'm fighting against. But the only reason that there seems to be that battle, or why it seems to be so strong in man, is he can't identify it. Ordinary men are not just are not engaged in that kind of battle, and they're not attempting to hold a shark at bay. Now, we're not talking physical. Now you got to change this real quick, that this whole thing is in a man's mind, and here is non-life generated thought, and here's life generated thought, and you're trying to pull them out of the water and kill them. Or, put another way, the rallying cry that I mentioned of an old honored mystical order, their battle cry was, abandon ship!